Omni Theatre, and to the Shrine. I feel very excited that I get to sit on this set every time I do this behind the scenes panel discussion. For those of you who haven't been here before for a behind the scenes conversation, it's usually a conversation to contextualize the play, the themes that emerge from the play, that's over and beyond the artistry that you're going to watch right after the conversation. And we do live stream this conversation, so hi to those joining us online. So I'm Shruti Mukund, the Director of Community Engagement here at Omni. And a lot of my job has been to understand who is not coming to the theater and what are the different things and themes that might interest them and highlight them to bring people who traditionally don't go to the theater to come to the theater. And of course, make sure the people who already come here are continuing to see what they love and more. So can I get a show of the hands for anyone who's here for the first time? Welcome to Omni Theatre. Thank you for joining us today. And welcome to all those who have come here before too. And today we're here to talk about performance and resistance. Fela Kuti, if you don't already know, was not just known for his music, but he was a political activist, and his mother was his inspiration, who was also an activist. And so we have two amazing speakers here who are actually going to do more of the talking than I am going to, because they are the experts in this field. So I would like to welcome Dean Stephanie Shonekan from the University of Maryland. She's the Dean of the College of Arts and Science. Welcome. She is a professor of ethnomusicology and the dean. As I just mentioned, Shonekan earned a doctorate in ethnomusicology and folklore with a minor in African American studies in 2003 from Indiana University. Her dual heritage, combining West Africa and with the West Indies, allows her to straddle the Black world comfortably. She has published articles and books on Afrobeat, go figure, Fela Kuti, Nigerian and African-American hip-hop, soul music, and country music. Her publications explore the nexus where identity, history, culture, and music meet. I mean, we couldn't have found a better person for today's conversation. Thank you. Next on stage, I welcome Christopher Prince, a singer, poet, actor, and activist right here in DC. How exciting is that? After his early training with DC's workshop for careers in the arts, he went on to become an integral member of the Black, gay, and lesbian art scene of the 1980s and 90s. His poetry has been published in the Baltimore Sun, Hakeem Mabuti's Black Box Bulletin, Kalalulu, a journal of African diaspora, arts and letters. As a vocalist with jazz pop quartet, the four of us, neo-soul duo, Night Skin, and more recently with his own jazz trio, Christopher has performed at prestigious venues all over the DC area. Christopher is currently completing an Atlas Arts Lab residency. His production, Loud as Rolling Sea, was just recently mounted in June at the Atlas Performing Arts Center. So in addition to his artistic gifts, Christopher has a long history of artistic activism. He has co-produced and managed the stage entertainment for Black Gay Pride Day and produced gospel and soul celebration for HRC. So I welcome both Christopher Prince and Dean Shonekan. We have linked their bios on our website. Feel free to go learn more about them. And now we'll go right into our conversation about performance and resistance. I'm not your average politician, Kuti said in a 1986 interview with Spin magazine. Oh. No, it's on. I think we lost that.
Test.
Oh, okay. I'm not your average politician, Kuti said in a 1986 interview with Spin magazine. I believe in higher forces. I believe that suffering has a purpose. I cannot suffer like this for no reason. I'm not working for any selfish reason or ulterior motives. I'm working for the improvement of my fellow man, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is Fela Kuti. So, Music in Revolution provides us a dynamic introduction to the most prominent artists and musical styles that have emerged all over the world. And politics and culture, everything shapes what society is, right? And arts is a way to marry all those ideas and then bring it to people in a way that's palatable to people and people resonate with it. And Fela Kuti was such a charismatic personality. He had people who believed in him, his art, and his music. So I would like each of you to introduce yourself as to how you relate to the arts and activism.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be at the Albany Theater and to share the stage with you, Stephanie. As I said earlier, helped me in the creation of my piece, even though you did not know you did. I consider myself a political person. I was raised in a politically aware household. My art stems from who I am, as with most creative people. I think not all of us reside in that political identity, but I do just be in this skin, in this land, in this time. So my art reflects that. I think my personage reflects that. I think that as a Black man in America, you cannot divorce yourself from visually the space that you take up. And being a political person, I'm conscious of that. And so that informs me in my art and how I move through the world.
Yeah, that's similar to my response. But I'll kind of zoom out a little bit because, as Shruti said, I've got 1 foot in the West Indies and 1 foot in West Africa. My father was Nigerian, my mother was Trinidadian. And so for me, growing up in post-independent Nigeria, I was always confused because my parents they both had this skin color, but they were also very different, different kinds of food, different kinds of music that they listened to. My father was very much about high life music and juju music, which is a Nigerian popular form. And my mother loved calypso. So for me, as I was growing up, listening to King Sunny Ade on one side, and then Mighty Sparrow on the other side, and of course, African American music was throughout my childhood. I found that music was a great way to think about who I was as a little Black girl in the big Black world, because it allowed me to understand the political, though humorous, side of calypso, and also the really traditional part of juju and then Afrobeat. And so for me, when I found my way to ethnomusicology as a field, I found it to be something that was both personal and political. Personally, I found myself, I felt seen in music. I felt that music was a great way to understand who I was. But also, as Nigeria was itself going through its struggles as a fledgling democracy, I found that music was a great way of expressing and understanding what was going on, whether it was through the national anthem or through juju or high life, and then of course, as we will get to it, Afrobeat. The music, the lyrics, the sounds allowed me to understand what was happening in this very multicultural country with 250 languages that was struggling with understanding how to be after the end of colonialism. And so music was a great way of doing that. So I'm a scholar, but my scholarship definitely, I hope, inspires activists and performers to understand how we can analyze find meaning in the music of our time, whether it's rock and roll or reggae or soul music. It's all in the music.
So before we go into the resistance part of it, do you think it's still valid to say art can be there just for the sake of art, or is it this bourgeois idealistic way of thinking of the arts?
I think it can. Artists are creative people, and I don't think that it would be respectful of a person's individuality to say that their art lacks value because it is not political. So I think that you can create for the sake of creating. It is a form of communication, it is a form of self-expression. That being said, we are living in perilous times. And I believe that every individual is political. Whether you accept that ban or not is up to you. There's an old saying, either you have a seat at the table or you're on the menu. And if you don't recognize yourself as a political person, believe it that there are forces out there that do recognize you as a political entity, and then you'll be manipulated. So as an artist, I express myself emotionally in love songs or an appreciation for the environment and brotherhood, but then I also express myself as a political entity. Neither has more, I would not qualify one as being better or more powerful than the other. I think it is more a matter of intent. And if you intend to enlighten, if you intend to help to open someone up, then there's power in that, regardless of where you're coming from as an artist.
So, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think, I'll be honest, for many years as a scholar, I always felt that music had to do something. Music had to tell a story, it had to move, it had to inspire, it had to ignite, right? Us to do something. And I've always said that Black music, which is what I study, and I also study country music, so there you go.
But that's ex-country or not? No.
That too. But I've always said that music should do something. It should be more than just be beautiful. And I have always said also that Black music has not had the luxury just to be beautiful. Because wherever we are in the world, whether we're in post-colonial Nigeria or South Africa or Mozambique or Jamaica, that the struggle against whatever the patriarchal systems of power are, capitalism, all of that, that's real, and that has a real impact on people like me, right? Whether we're in Africa or elsewhere. That said, I would say also that, as Christopher said, the music doesn't have to always push, that the music can tell a love story, right? So many times we don't see romance in Black stories. We see protest, we see activism, we see movement, but we are human beings who fall in love, who fall out of love, who love a barbecue, right? And more lately, most recently, thinking about the kinds of art that this generation of artists are producing. I have the great pleasure to be the Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities at the University of Maryland, where we have young people who are creating work that is so creative, provocative, interesting, edgy, but also just beautiful, and why can't we allow those students in their varied forms see themselves in that art? And then, of course, lastly, we know that the writer's strike is on. And we're all so worried that we won't get to see our shows, and those shows, some of them are silly, some of them are just reality shows. But that's what got us through the pandemic. Many of us found shows while we were home for 2 years. So art doesn't have to always be pushy and move and moving in that way, but sometimes moving in terms of, oh, that's just so beautiful, is something that we should all allow our artists to revel in as well.
Can I say something else about that? Because you sparked something in me. I think maybe the concept of art for art's sake might be a bourgeois statement, that art exists beyond that definition. As you were talking about love songs, it made me think of coming out of the space of authenticity, and it made me think of India Arie. For instance, her love song, she speaks of Black skin, she recognizes her authentic self in her music, and that makes it political without being pushy, as you said. So there's a way that it works. So I think maybe it's that concept, that statement has its bourgeois tendencies, but creativity is far beyond what that statement implies.
Yeah, and I agree, being an Indian classical dancer myself, like I feel the dancing we do is not like revolutionary in any which way or form. A lot of the songs are from the Hindu pantheon, but the fact that it's our bodies doing it here at the Kennedy Center or in a park in BC and dancing it to say we're here. And I think like when you were saying growing up, the music you heard helped you find your place in this world. And I think that's something, that's the magic that art has. And yeah, I mean, not everybody thinks they're an activist, but they eventually are perceived as one, so that they don't become the menu, the food on the table.
Right. So just one more.
I love that we're sharing one microphone.
I know.
In a theater. That's fine. I think
Just one more thing I think is really. Okay, I'm sorry, only theater.
So one more thing I will just say is that if art can just be beautiful, and we are convinced of that, then we have to expand our understanding of what beautiful means, right? That for so long, beauty has been defined only in one way. And of course, growing up, looking at magazine covers and the most beautiful person in the world on the People magazine cover every year after year after year, there was a concept and a definition of beauty that was limiting. And so as we think about beauty, we must also, I think that seeing or hearing a song like something that we will hear on this stage, or just hearing a song by India Arie or Aretha Franklin, if it's just a beautiful song and we can collectively agree that there's beauty in that, just as there's beauty in Carole King's song, then that's revolutionary. That's change, that's radical. And so revolutionary in different ways.
Yeah, and when you were talking about resistance again, and post-colonial world, and so there is that whole, like we were discussing there, things you're resisting against, whether you're resisting against a colonial world, in the post-colonial world, and this concept of what is high art versus what is the other. Oh, that's ethnomusicology. So I have a question to ask you about that. How do you feel about the word ethnomusicology?
Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, it's a valid question. And I think in the field of musicology and ethnomusicology, we are really, we're struggling with titles and definitions and canons too. What are the canons? Why is ethnomusicology up on the side? While musicology is this bigger thing? And then why is Western canon better? Why are masters of music only in a certain part of Western Europe, from a certain part of Western Europe, and why aren't people like Marvin Gaye or Stevie Wonder, why aren't they masters as well, right? So where do you study a Marvin Gaye, and where do you study a Beethoven? Well, Beethoven is going to be on the musicology side, right? Traditionally, and Marvin is going to be on the ethnomusicology side, or Ravi Shankar is going to be on the ethnomusicology side. That's the way the academy has evolved. And we are all part of, well, I'm definitely part of the academy. The academy is very grounded in Western European models. I'm a product of that history. But I'm really proud that so many of us scholars are rethinking. Our students are asking us to rethink the boundaries of what we study, how we study, what we're called. And so I've heard many of my colleagues at the University of Maryland say, why do we have ethnomusicologists and musicologists? Aren't we all studying music? And what is conveyed when we say ethnomusicology? But we're still at a time when I'm really proud to, I don't want to give up the ethnomusicology term, because I think it is important to signal that the academy has let us down, and that there have been scholars who have fought to find space for us to study all these beautiful musics from Egypt and Morocco and Ghana, right? And yes, sure, we didn't find a space for it in musicology, so we had to create our own and etch it out. And now we are approached all the time by musicologists to help think about musicology as a much wider field. And so we're getting there, and so I'm still proud of ethnomusicology.
So in your study in West African traditions and African traditions, and what patterns have you seen that's emerged out of like music that's come out of resistance?
You're a practitioner.
Yeah, what do you?
Right. What are the patterns? So I remember when I taught at the University of Massachusetts, I taught a class that had been developed by a drummer by the name of Max Roach, who had also taught in the same department years earlier. And he had created a course called Revolutionary Concepts in African American Music. And he had taught it for many years, and then let's see, who else taught that class? Archie Shepp, who also taught that class. So when I got the syllabus, I was given the syllabus, and I kind of had to dust it off because it had been used so many times. I, as somebody who was very different from a Max Roach, but who had so much respect for Max Roach and what he had done for jazz, had to bring myself to it. And because you all know now, I feel like I do straddle the Black world comfortably. I had to bring in some Fela, I had to bring in some Bob Marley, some Peter Tosh, and then put it all on the same page as James Brown, as all the artists in the United States that had created some really revolutionary music. So what are the patterns? The patterns are unapologetic, pulsing. The music that we're talking about feels like it's coming out of the Black Power movement, right? It has to do something. It has to move. It can't just sit there. And so whether we're talking about Bob Marley or Fela Kuti or Hugh Masekela or Nina Simone, hello, right? These artists are all looking at the history and the layers and the nuances of Black culture, of Blackness, and they're putting into their music ideas that are accessible to. They have to, all of this has to be accessible. Has to be music that allows us to, the common man, to understand what is going on in the music. For Black revolutionary music too, it has to be, gotta move. Can't just sit there and listen. It's not a symphony orchestra. And so there are many characteristics of revolutionary Black music that cuts across the Black world. And you always know it when you hear it.
So you want to share with us how you use your poetry music to speak your mind politically?
Sure. Well, I do it first by having a sense of time. I think that all periods there is a struggle with the hierarchy. Regardless of what the hierarchy is, whether it's feminism, whether it's racism and white supremacy, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's capitalism. And I'm a little selfish because I speak my mind. And sometimes I speak in anger, in resistance in that way. Sometimes I speak through my attempts to understand and hopefully bring understanding to someone else. Sometimes I speak from a celebratory voice in being able to embrace who I am in my sexuality, in my being an American, and being a Black American, which those two lenses sometimes switch in my head, at least. And so I speak from that. What I struggle with is to always be authentic and to be unfiltered, which is the biggest challenge in that. But I think that through a sense of vulnerability comes some connection. If I open up and present my art in that way, then it invites the other person to open up. And so there is that force of communication and hopefully a way to inspire and kind of move things forward. I think that art ultimately, especially when it comes to political music and art in general, it invites change, a forward trajectory, whether it's an internal dialogue or external in action. And so, that's what I attempt to do for myself first. I have to admit, because some people don't always do that. So I have to be honest about who I am as an artist. And then hopefully that translates.
So we've been talking a lot about action, inviting, from inside to outside, what do you think about the NAP ministry resistance? For those of you who don't know, this kind of came about, it was simmering, but since the Black Lives Matter movement and everything coming on social media, this woman started this thing called NAP ministry. She said that her act of resistance was to take a nap and not that she would just take a nap on a job, but it was that I'm taking a nap as self-care, and I'm against this capitalistic world of push, go, and if I need to rest, I will rest. So it's more like rest than napping, and it's called the NAP ministry, and she's actually written a manifesto about it. And it's really interesting because when we think about resistance, we think about activists, we think about people like Fela Kuti who are so charismatic. They're out there, they're giving everything of themselves out there, and they're inviting people in by giving at the cost of themselves. There is this shift in resistance. So what do you think about that?
I want to go up first.
Yes, the NAP ministry. So I have some very close friends who are into it. I mean, they bought the cards. We just had a retreat. They brought the cards, and we had to pull a card. And I'm the oldest of this group of young women. They're much younger, and they're into it. They're like, okay, now we need to think about how we dream at night and stuff like that, you know. And I look, if that's the thing that gets them through tenure and so on, right? Do it. And you know, I humored them. Yeah, I think we're all a product of our generation as well. And one of the things that I find myself doing a lot in my position as dean is I get to see at least two generations of faculty. There are faculty who graduated like in the 70s, who did things a certain way. They did not nap. They were on typewriters, right? And they have a certain way of doing their scholarship and publishing, and they're great. I love them. They set the tone, built a foundation for the rest of us. And then there are folks that are graduating with PhDs right now, and they're coming in with different demands and different ways of thinking about how they do their work. I actually think that they have a really healthy approach to work. And I wish that had been me, but it just wasn't. And I don't know if I can build that. But there's something in the NAP ministry that I have a friend who's writing a book on refusal. And a lot of Black women scholars are thinking about what does it look like? What did it look like for Fannie Lou Hamer? You know, what did she go through? Nina Simone, what did Nina Simone go through? What could have happened if she had refused some of the and when she did, what happened to her career when she said enough is enough? I want to not keep singing these songs about love. I want to sing. I refuse. I want to sing a song that talks about what's happening in Mississippi, right, or Alabama. And then what happens when Max Roach works with Abby Lincoln,
Right.
and she refuses to do certain things. That is resistance, and that's revolutionary. However, Nina Simone, Abby Lincoln, and so many other Black women really were not appreciated or supported when they made those choices that should have been healthy for them, but were not healthy for their careers. If there was a NAP ministry at that time, they'd have still been alive, I think.
So a quick sidebar before we get to Christopher.
Sure.
So Diana Ross still performs,
Mhm.
and so on her rider, I think she's just done with like shitty, like, you know, back room, green rooms. She asks for a white sofa everywhere she goes because she's like, I'm done. I want to be treated right, and I demand, as a part of my rider, a white sofa. So she knows it can never be dirty.
Well, I have to admit to not being familiar with that ministry and rest as resistance until you brought it up. I found it interesting. I think it is generational as well, which is not dismissive at all, because at this point in my life, I'm trying to increase my cross-generational experiences, because I think that there's a lot to learn all the way around, and I am in no sense of deposit of all the knowledge. I think self-care is revolutionary, and it's an act of resistance within itself. I think that there is I would say, the term first world problems. And I think there's a bit of an indulgence, however, because there are places on this planet, places in this country where people can't really afford to nap. That that's a luxury, it's a class luxury to say, okay, I'm gonna prove I can lay myself down and just help. No, okay, yes, in a way, but no. So there are other ways to approach it, but I do believe that self-care is important. And I think that considering it in a larger context, Stephanie, as you did, when it comes to resistance and advocating for self is also a powerful tool, a powerful individual tool in the way that you relate to the larger society. And I also think when it comes to considerations of capitalism, I think the SNAP ministry kind of came out of the new thinking, post-pandemic thinking, that when you relate to who you are as a worker, then you have to recalibrate your identity within the capitalist system, and you're no longer a clog. And I think that's very important as well, and kind of could be manifested in other areas of how you relate in that hierarchical structure outside of taking a nap.
So, Beyonce and Lizzo are considered one of the most powerful Black women in pop culture today, right? I mean, is this working now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, especially when Beyonce came at the Super Bowl and did her Black formation, I mean, that was like epic. So, like them, who do you think are artists we should be looking out for? Who, I mean, whoever's already making the waves and people have heard, but who are the ones that, if you haven't, you should be looking out for in today's world?
Oh, goodness. Let's see. So I definitely would have put Beyonce on that list, and Lizzo in different ways, in very different ways. So I have 3 children, and my son is home. He's just graduated from college, and he's our youngest. And whenever he comes home, I'm excited because he brings his music with him, right? And so I'm trying to soak as much up before he goes off to graduate school. But Kendrick Lamar. Kendrick is amazing. You know, a lot of people look down on hip hop. I don't. I think that hip hop is a great way of thinking about, again, mastery of music and message. Not everything in hip hop, as in not everything in classical music, right, or jazz, but there are these artists that really are brilliant at looking at the environment, taking the form and merging them. And Kendrick Lamar is great at that, which is why he won a Pulitzer Prize. The first hip hop artist, and I think the second musician after Bob Dylan to win a Pulitzer Prize.
I was going to say Kendrick as well. There is a brother by the name of Christopher Pierce who wrote a song, came out about maybe 2 years ago, called American Silence, that is a very powerful piece of music. And he is, it's not folk music, it's not roots music, but it comes out of a kind of an acoustic, for lack of better terms, it's not really quite acoustic either. An augment of country music. And there's a sister, her first name is Audrey, and I can't think of her last name on the tip of my tongue, it is not, but she has a song that challenges the South. I think it's called New South Rising or something like that. That challenges the South to possess its history and move forward, like, you know, we can do better. There are Black artists within that country genre that I think are doing some interesting things that outside of rap, which we know traditionally has a very political edge to it, and some of the rap artists that don't get a lot of airplay. So funny how popular music has been kind of ghettoized and siloed. And when it comes to hip hop and rap, that music is not played on the Kiss and, you know, those high art stations. You have to kind of find them online. Oh God, yes, of course, it's their Eminem, which is another commentary. We won't get into that one.
Yeah, we'll have one about whether Lil Nas X is country or not another time.
Right, that was really very smart of him. Because I mean, he's not country, but he used that. That was just smart. He's just a smart guy.
That was resistance.
Yeah, that was resistance. That was
So-
resistance in truth. And he is marking himself as a black gay artist, as of just him taking up space and being himself is a political move
So
within
if you
itself.
haven't watched the video of Old Town Road and Montero of Little Nas X, I highly encourage you to go and watch it on YouTube. And you can look up, there's been a lot of discourse on because he was on the top 10, I think he made it to the country, like top 10 songs, but they said he can't be considered a country artist. So, some homework for all of you.
And there's one more thing I'd recommend. Last week, I believe, Jill Scott did a version of the Star Spangled Banner. If you haven't seen that, you should. It's provocative, right? How many of you have seen it? Yes? It's stunning, but it will make you think.
So before we open up to questions from our audience, I wanted to ask each of you to quickly tell us what we should be looking for in the show today in terms of Fela's music, or things that you think that we should.
Yeah, I'll go first because mine's going to be short. I don't know. I'm not the Fela expert. This is going to be an experience for me. I love Fela's music, but
So what struck you about Fela's music?
that is a jam. Like you talk about how special music gets you up. That first is dance music. It gets you off your feet. It moves you in your heart, in your soul, and mentally. He was such a brave artist. Not all artists are brave when it comes to their politics. And bravery, I think, manifests itself in different ways. You don't always have to put your life on the line or your material goods on the line, but you have to put something on the line. And some people artists don't do that. I think in this day and age, we kind of romanticize bravery, and we don't attach the cost to it. And Fela kind of stepped into that space in a very powerful way.
We like our social media resistance in today's world.
Right, yeah.
Well, thank you for that question. I love that question because I love Fela. So what should we be looking for? So I was asked to write a small book. It's called the 33 and a Third series. It's a series of books that take one album by an artist and it just digs deep. And this series has been around for a long time, but they've never had an album of Fela. So I was asked to write a proposal to contribute. It's a small book, 33,000 words. So I think it's doable. And so I proposed it, and the reviews have just come in. And there are 4 reviewers, and if there are any scholars in the room, there's always one. There's always one. There's 3 great ones, and then there's always that one. So that was number 4. Number 4. I will remember him for her forever. It's anonymous. And so this reviewer said, well, Stephanie Shonekan says in her proposal that Fela Kuti is the most influential and important African artist of all time. And that is she can't say that. Yes, I can. I was like, sir, tell me who else is, and I know as a scholar, you're not supposed to be a fan, but I really would, I said, okay, I'll add the word arguably. Is that good? But what you should be watching here is that indeed, this is the story of arguably the most important and most influential African artist of all time. And I'll just put the African there. I would say one of the most important artists of all time, but Okay, I'll be good, right? Yes, arguably. I remember who I was and who I thought I was before I met Fela's music. And I remember what it did to me once I understood what he was doing with his music. Fela was, as Christopher said, brave, bold, unapologetic, and took many risks because the stakes were very high. He was responding to a Nigeria that was like many other African countries, struggling with understanding what independence meant, because these countries had been colonized for so long, and even the negotiation of independence was just wrought with injustice. You know, what the British did, what the French did, was leave countries that were already ravished and made a path for their companies to come in and continue reaping from countries that were quote unquote independent. Fela also realized that our identities had really been taken over by colonialism. So I sit here with the first name of Stephanie, which makes no sense, right? Right? I was born in Equatorial Guinea and my father was Nigerian. So to have a name like Stephanie means that something must have gone down, right? And we sit here and we don't see any white folks whose names are Chukuma or Apia, you know, or Kwesi. So something is imbalanced there, right? He also was very, very smart in thinking about the religions that we were practicing. I'm a Christian, I'm still a Christian. And yet he made me think about what that means and why it is that every Christmas we would send cards that had a Jesus that was blue-eyed and blonde. This is something I grew up with. So when I listened, I sat down and paid attention. There was a boyfriend who introduced me to Fela, and I have a husband now for many years, who's in the room. I will not look at him. But that boyfriend, he introduced me to Fela, and it was a game changer. I started understanding who I was. I started understanding why it was problematic that my hair was a certain way. I started understanding that many of my friends who were bleaching their skins, there was something that was going on in our psyche that we hadn't thought about. I started understanding why it was problematic that my father and my uncles would, in Nigeria, which is close to the equator, would dress up in suits every day and go to work in the hot sun, right? I started understanding all these things. This is what you're going to see on this stage. So he pushed back, realized there was a lot of corruption going on that was a carryover from colonialism, and not to absolve the leaders who were corrupt, who he fought against, but understanding that the democracy that he was dealing with was a democracy that had been really affected by the history that had led up to it. And so he's pushing back. You'll also see, I hope you understand my passion for his mother. I'm a mother, we all have mothers, right? Mothers are critical to who we are and what we become. And so when I got my PhD in Indiana, and while I was doing that, I realized that this fella that I'd known so well, that I picked up a book about his mother and realized that she had led a revolution in the 1940s, a market women's revolution. Market women in Nigeria were brilliant. They got their goods, they priced them, they sold their goods, and then the colonial administration and the chiefs, who were all men, would come and tax them. And the women said, enough. the woman couldn't read, so Fela's mother, who is also the auntie of Wale Soyinka, Nobel Prize laureate of Nigeria, literary giant. Fela's mother taught the woman how to read so they could understand these laws. And then she and the women sang songs as they marched on the colonial administration, as they marched on the chief's palace to say, enough is enough, stop taxing us. I'm going on too long here, but I'm excited about this show, and I want you to be as well. As a result of what she did, these women, they chased out the Alake, who was the chief. He abdicated because these women were so resolute in the songs that they were singing. And Fela was a little boy when this was happening. When I realized that, I was a young mother, and I realized the influence that I had on my children. And I said, all the books that have been written about Fela do not mention his mother as an influence. They mention Miles Davis, they mention the Black Panthers, they do not mention his mother as an influence on his music and what he was doing in his lyrics. And so I started writing about this and telling that story to the horror of the Fela scholars, who were mostly white men, interestingly. And some Nigerian men too, who were like, a woman didn't influence this giant. And so my first article was on Fela's mother. And so you will see her here. She's a big part of his story because he did not play with his mother. And you'll see her right there. She's part of the set. And so I want you to pay attention to what he does. There's a big story about women in this show, but there's also a big story about the music. And you're going to move, you're going to sing along, and you're going to. I hope that you're as excited about Fela after this as I obviously am.
Thank you so much. And actually, true to what Stephanie said, part of this, with the way this production has been conceived, is for you to feel like you're in the shrine. So if you're sitting in your seat, something is wrong. Remember. Any questions quickly before we move on to maybe yummy Nigerian food? Yes.
Can I ask about the division between art music and popular music? Because this seems to be another way that things are placed in categories.
So the question is, what is the difference between art, music, and popular music?
I'll give you my opinion, and the scholar will chime in. I would first put out that some of these musical categories are contrivances. They are not, so let's just hold on to that as a bit of truth. Pop music as a genre, in my mind, when we say contemporary pop music, you can sing along to it, it has a certain melodic flow. Alternative music, that label has political connotations in my mind. I don't know, curious to hear what Stephanie says about that, because they do that, especially nowadays, they do that to music that they can't quite categorize. Musicians in this day and age can be rather expansive in their expression, which is a good thing. And they have various musical influences, whether it be jazz, whether it be what used to be called world music, or music that comes from any culture outside of the European or American canon. Music that can be atonal at points. Anything that goes like that, they'll tag off on it. It really is kind of a cop-out in my mind. It's a way of and it also is a way of restricting the sales and the access that an artist has. There's a lot of politics involved in it more than an aesthetic, to me.
Well, one difference is that just art is in America, especially, and not in other parts of the world, is primarily high art is nonprofit, and the rest commercial art is multi-million industry. So there is something to say about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a great question. It's a question that allows us to think about the academy as well. Because in the academy, what have we been privileging? Art music. Because art music is on the score, it's written, and much of popular music is oral cultures. It's orally handed down from one generation to another. We can all sing Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. We don't need a score necessarily, right? And I think that is part of the problem. I think when we think about classical music, we forget that when classical music first started, it was popular as well. You know, like it was for the folk. Yes, it was for the folk. It was for the people. We have typically we have elevated it so that we can study it, but then that has the effect of putting other musics down. And what our students are asking us to do is rethink that, right? That if we're thinking about a world that is equal, that is just, that is diverse in all its beautiful ways, then certainly we should think of Indian classical music in the same way that we think of European, German, Austrian classical music. It's as sophisticated, it's as complex. Sure, it may not be on a score, but it is just as intricate.
Yeah, and I think in some ways, like whether it's literature or music or the classification of arts is a classist way of looking at things, like Pulp Fiction. I mean, there are some books, the concept of Pulp Fiction, which is like sort of the pop music where it comes and goes and it's contemporary, and like you have the 70s or the 80s, but there's music that stands time, and that's how the classification originally was. But there is also Eurocentric like genre class categorizing of what can be defined as art and what is just ethnomusic or ethnic cultural dance. And so, I guess there's a lot more to be discussed about that. Any other questions? Yes.
So much is politicized now, and clearly next year is going to be a major watershed in the realm of politics. How does the art world prepare itself to be proactive rather than simply reactive and wait to see what happens? How is there an opportunity to try to have some impact when so much is coalescing and coming together next year?
The question is, how can the art world be proactively working towards, politics and next year's elections instead of being reactive?
I would put your answer maybe in two categories. One as response for institutions, and then one as a response as individuals. And I would say, as an individual artist, I would say the preparation would be in how you prepare yourself as a political entity. What do you do to fortify yourself for the trepidations of the times? Whether it is building coalitions, whether it is organizing outside of your art with organizations, which is one of my practices through the years I've always done. And in having an internal dialogue, in aligning what you believe with what you do. I think a lot of times we have a personal ethos of what we stand for, what we think is right and what we think is wrong, but it is often intellectual and not manifested in action. And one of the things that I consistently try to do, because I don't think it is an act that happens singularly in time, is to always try to calibrate, are my actions reflective of my beliefs? And there's a gradation there. How close to my beliefs am I really going to act? What's the risk involved in that? What is the benefit in it? And so this, so it's two ways, I think, as an artist, that you go about that process when you think about what's coming forth. First have that internal dialogue, and then reach out beyond yourself in collaborative efforts. When that's as an individual, I think for an institution, the thing is a lot bigger, and that's something I really can't speak to, but it's worth considering.
Yes, so I'll take on the institution. I think the individual, clearly, we have to be ready. Institutionally, especially as we think of the arts and humanities, which is my domain, I've been thinking a lot about how we're always on the defensive, always. Another article is going to come out, arts and humanities is eroding, our enrollments are dropping, students want engineering, they want to be, they're not understanding the importance of arts and humanities. And so I think my team and I have been talking about getting off the ropes, because we're always on the ropes, we're taking this hit and that hit. We want to come off the ropes and tell our story, that there's really no leadership or movement without arts and humanities. That if we don't have leaders that ground their decisions in ethics, right, in philosophy, in understanding communication, in understanding history, then those decisions are flawed. If we don't look to our artists to help us understand creativity, innovation, improvisation, then we're not creating or cultivating good leaders, whether they're engineers or otherwise. Yes, sure, we need engineers, but we want to make sure that engineers are grounded as well. And I think that this question is so timely, because we are in a moment that we didn't think we'd ever see, where books are being taken off the curriculum, where a poem, like the inaugural poem, is being removed from students' eyes, right? That's art. And that poem is actually really gentle, it's not no Nina Simone, Mississippi, goddamn. It is, let's look at the hills and see where we can go. It's a beautiful poem, but even that is scary, right? So we have to realize that art is in danger, and we need theaters like this and the great work that the Only Theater is doing, like this, and things that you've done in the past, to remind our citizenry, our population, our neighbors, that this has happened before, and look what it did. So when you hear the politicians talking about comparing themselves to Stalin and Hitler and so on, when you hear that kind of rhetoric, it's in history. Let's go back and read and see what happened. Let's learn that. Let's watch The Sound of Music, right? It's there too. It's in our art. So I think it's timely. I'm thinking about it all the time. If you have ideas, we would love to hear them, because our students are asking that same question.
I think from Only Theater and just the theater industry and the arts, I think this is the question we've been asking ourselves too, and how to be relevant to community, and especially in the pandemic when no one cared that arts organizations were closed for in the entire year. Nobody stood up in the community and said, oh my God, where are these arts institutions? And that is something we don't ever want to happen again, because we want to remind people that this is where we gather. We have to build this community to bring together. And some of that is in preparation, whether it's this election or the future election. I feel our society's kind of become so isolated and fragmented and spend more time on this social, virtual world that we've forgotten we can be together. And the pandemic had, kind of kept us apart for our safety, that we've forgotten that actually coming together. And what you're going to see today when you're all together here in the shrine is something that you experience, the joy, the togetherness and the resonance that we've forgotten. And I think that is our duty as arts organizations, to reignite community through the arts and say, come back, come, this is where you find your home, where you can be anybody and you can still find yourself in this. And so I think with that note, I want you all to keep coming back and enjoy the show later today. And thank you, Stephanie and Chris, for your insightful, thoughtful words. My mind's already worrying, and I'm going to go back and look at all this music here. Rather listen to it. And thank you very much.
Thank you.